Looking for skilled talent? So is everyone else. A recent survey shows 63% of companies are gearing up to expand in 2025. So, how do you quickly uncover the right candidate? With Robert Half. Robert Half's specialized recruiters and award winning AI can find you skilled professionals in as little as 48 hours. When you need top candidates in finance and accounting, tech, marketing and creative, legal, admin, and customer support, turn to Robert Half. Visit roberthalf.com/SHRM today. At Robert Half, we know talent.
Welcome to the AI+HI Project. I'm Nichol Bradford, SHRM's Executive in Residence for AI+HI. Thanks for joining us. Each week, we sit down with visionaries from the worlds of business, tech, and HR to provide you with deep insights, actionable strategies, and practical advice for harnessing the transformative potential of artificial intelligence combined with human ingenuity. This week, we're exploring the cultural impacts of AI in organizations, focusing on how AI reshapes collaboration, learning, and adaptability. Our guest is Sam Ransbotham, professor of business analytics, Boston College, and guest editor for MIT Sloan Management Review's Artificial Intelligence and Business Strategy Initiative. Sam, welcome to the AI+HI Project.
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm kind of worried about the label visionary. I'm not sure if I can live up to that.
Well, I have been following you and your research for quite some time, and I think it's incredibly relevant for where organizations and enterprises actually are now that we're sort of in year 3 of generative AI, and people are really, starting to get into the challenges of how to really do implementation. And so your research at that intersection of organizational culture and AI is super relevant. So could we start with your journey in analytics and AI, and what inspired you to research this and explore this area in particular? And how did your background and multidisciplinary background shape your perspective?
Well, I think that's a really interesting take on it. And I appreciate that you're interested in these aspects as well. And you said my research, and really it's our research. There's a whole group of people involved, both from MIT Sloan Management Review and from Boston Consulting Group. But one of the things that we were talking about is there's a tendency to think first about first order effects. And so, the first order effects of a new technology are going to be make it faster and cheaper. And, I think there's a great quote. I'm not going to get it right here in the first place, but we tend to underestimate the long-term effects of technology and overestimate the short-term effects. And short-term effects are things like cost and savings and efficiencies, but long-term are changing the way we work and changing the way we do things. And that's what got us really fascinated about this.
So, Sam, I'd really like to know, out of all of the things that you could focus on in research, why this particular subject?
I'm a bit of a nerd, and that won't come as a surprise to anybody that talks to me. And I like technology. I think technology is fascinating. But in this particular case, I think the intersection of artificial intelligence and business strategy and business culture is really possibly more interesting than the tech itself. What we're seeing is that technology is rapidly changing and it's pretty fascinating. And again, I'm fascinated by it. But these technologies are becoming a bit more commodities. And what I mean by that is that you or I can right now go and download code off the internet or use models across the web to do artificial intelligence stuff. When anybody can do that, then the things that become interesting are not the technology itself, but how we use them. And these are always the difficult problems. The technology typically you can solve with a pizza and a caffeine of some sort, but people and implementations and cultural change, these are fascinating and difficult to change.
Yes, your 2024 report that you just put out with BCG and MIT and all of the other collaborators that you have highlights the interplay between AI and culture. And one of the things that really caught my eye, also from your 2021 research, was that AI actually could improve the culture of an organization, and that a good like a implementation done well can actually not only put you in a better place from business processes and efficiency on the other side, but actually culturally. And this report is the only report I've found, and I read everything, that said something like that. Could you dig into that for us?
Well, so, this comes back to the same idea we were talking about, that our first order effects are typically about costs and efficiencies and value. And I'm not against any of those. I think it's wonderful. These are great effects of technology. But then when you think about what happens within organizations, it becomes more complicated. And so we started thinking about it as a dynamic between the culture in the organization, the use of the technology, and how effective the technology is. Because one of the things that we were seeing is, well, let's say that you use a technology and it helps things improve in some way. Well, then people get happier, people enjoy their work, morale improves, and then the culture improves. And that leads people to adopt more of that same technology. When we do things we like, it becomes a cycle where we want to do more of those. I like ice cream, I eat more ice cream. Now, that may not be a perfect analogy, but the cycle can start. At the same time, the cycle can also go the other way. If people have bad experiences or if technology goes crazy, goes nuts, and then, well, that can lead to a culture of not using the technology, not embracing it, inventing shadow IT systems around these artificial intelligence systems. And so the point here is that that cycle can go either way. And so we got really interested in seeing what helps the cycle go positive versus the cycle go negative.
What does help a cycle go positive?
Oh, yeah, okay, I was worried you're gonna ask that because it's not a perfect thing where I can say, "All right, do these 6 things." We typically want lists that we can just go down and check off, but when we're talking about things like organizational culture, and in particular organizational learning, which is the focus of our more recent report, that is much more difficult, and that involves those pesky people who don't cooperate and don't do exactly what we tell them and don't have the perfectly aligned incentives that we want them to have. And, you know, I'm going to tell you some things that we've found, and you're going to, I think, look at that list and say, well, sure, let's do those things, but they're hard. And so, an example would be something like experimentation. We see a very different culture towards experimentation within the organizations that are learning better with artificial intelligence. Now, that involves a failure tolerance, like not yelling at people when things go wrong or when projects don't have perfect results, doing good postmortems of the projects to make sure that you've codified these learnings. Now, when I say these to you, Nicole, you're going to say, well, sure, let's do those things. But it turns out that many of these things are harder to do than just to say. And that takes, I don't know, I'm not sure if gumption is really a word, but it takes gumption of organizations willing to endure failure and see past that initial failure to perhaps long-term growth.
A few weeks ago, I interviewed Mary Murphy, and she's amazing. All of her work on growth cultures. And in addition, we also at SHRM are looking for what are the indicators of success and what are the characteristics of failure in people having successful implementations. And one of the things that we've seen from the different cases that we've spoken to or tracked down have been organizations that have a culture of experimentation, as you mentioned, and organizations, especially with generative AI, who bring employees in not only into how to get more process efficiency in their roles, but they have an on ramp for those employees to actually start to impact the business architecture and improve it. And I wonder if that sense of contribution and belonging and team play is one of the things that increases a positive culture.
I think you're really onto something here because what's a little bit different about this technology is it's the kind of the first time that we've started to really anthropomorphize technology and think about technology as another teammate. One of the questions that we happened to ask a few years ago, and I say happened to ask, it was at the last minute and we were thinking about our survey that goes out every year. And we thought, let's take let's take a risk on a question. And one of the questions that we asked that we felt like was a risk was, do you think that AI is a coworker? And that just seemed like a kind of an outlandish question. And we had a big debate about, well, we're just wasting a survey question to even ask that. And what we found is that 60% of the people felt like AI was a coworker. And that was a stunning number to us. And so when you're talking about onboarding a team, now we are starting about onboarding a team of people and technology at the same time. And so increasingly we're seeing these team dynamics involve not just the teams that were the H's in your SHRMs, but the technology. And I think that's going to be a big adjustment for us.
And is that a generative AI shift? Because what I found also really compelling, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, is you had the 2021 research. So you've been in this in this topic for a while, but you have you have the 2021 research and then the 2024. And what happened in the middle of that was the explosion of ChatGPT and the generative side of AI. And I think in organizations previously, I mean, AI has been around for a long time with machine learning and predictive AI, but this is sort of the first time that anyone can really sort of touch it. What are the differences that you've seen before and after? And then also, is it that generative AI part that's made people feel like, oh, this is my coworker?
Yeah, Nicole, I think you're all over that. And I think we are, I'd like to say brilliant, but I'm going to say lucky more that we started studying this back in 2017 and doing surveys. We have a lot of data about how people at organizations are using this technology from before this generative change. And it's funny, at this point, we talk about that as being traditional AI, which seems like such a oxymoron that we would have. If you told me in 2017 that I'd be talking about traditional AI in 2024, I don't think I would have believed that. But
Mm.
you're really onto something here with the familiarity that generative got to us. And what I mean by that is before, let's say, before the fall of when ChatGPT came out, most people in organizations that I talked to didn't use artificial intelligence. And what I mean by that is, there's a big asterisk beside that. But they didn't use it in that they didn't directly interact with anything that they felt like was artificial intelligence. I would ask people, "Oh, do you use AI?" And they would say, two-thirds of the people would say no, that they didn't use AI. But then we'd go back and we'd ask them about, oh, well, specific examples. Do you use this tool or that tool? They'd say, oh, well, yeah, of course I use that. And, half the people we talked to then kind of backed up and said, oh, no, if that's AI, then I certainly use it. And what was difficult before generative, it was all hidden and embedded in systems.
Mm.
It was, it was Zoom background blurring for you. I mean, that's not really AI, right? I mean, or it's Waze or,
Mm.
routing maps, getting you in the right map, but that's not really AI. So we have this tendency to discount what is AI the minute it becomes available
Mm.
and useful. Spell check, oh, that's not AI. Grammar check, that's not AI. Once it becomes possible, it can't possibly be artificial intelligence. But the contrast is exactly what you made. Then when ChatGPT came out, suddenly it was thrown in everybody's face. And now literally every person we talk to will say, yes, I use artificial intelligence.
Mm.
And that is a huge change. And it's particularly a huge change, higher within organizations at the C-suite levels. Before generative, those people were not likely to have downloaded Python and built their own models. Post generative, everybody's gone out there and used their tool. Pew Research did a great study about who's using artificial intelligence. And it's actually, the study is kind of dated now because it's, 2 years old, which is ancient in this space. But there's an inverse relationship between age and use of artificial intelligence. And so the older people were not using as much as younger people were. And I thought it was funny, their survey cut off at age 18. And I can assure you, with younger than 18-year-olds in my household, they are all over this technology.
Mm.
And so it's a difference that it's now pervasive and everywhere.
I had the same experience too. So before coming to SHRM, my focus has been on human potential and technology, and I invest through a pre-seed and seed stage venture fund that focuses on tech for mental, emotional, and social health. And one of the things that I noticed is that the pandemic made people care about mental health, and remote work made people care about social health. But the thing that made people care about emotions was ChatGPT. That's when I would have resonant conversations with people because of the way that the way that it, quote unquote, speaks to us feels very human with our words. Is, language is our OS. And so there's been this shift where people are starting to ask the question. So actually, I want to shift a little bit. I want to ask you about AI and uncertainty and adaptability. I'm starting to think that the number one, there's so much disruption that AI is going to cause, not just job disruption, but just it's going to affect every part of our lives. It is electricity. And um, I think that I'm starting to think the number one survival skill is adaptation, and the number one thriving skill is ideation, because it's what you said a little bit before, where it used to be, I think, it used to be that 20% was ideation and 80% was building and operating. But as we get more agents in place, as we get more agents on our teams, I think it's going to flip. It's going to be 80% ideation and 20% building and operating. And I don't think we I don't think we know what that means yet for organizations or for humans or for teams. I'd love to just hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, if you got the answer to that, I think it'd be amazing because, like you say, we're all learning about this. We've never had a human existence that had artificial intelligence before. So it's not like we can flip to the back of the book and see what's going to happen. We're all figuring this out in real time with each other. And that's both wonderful and terrifying at the same time. We've had, I think what you're speaking about, this creativity. I think about this. There's a colleague I have who has a budget for ice cream, and he says, if ice cream costs $1 and I have a $5 budget, I buy five ice creams. But if ice cream costs a quarter and I still have that same $5, I can buy 20 ice creams. So, ice cream here is the technology. When it's
Mhm.
becoming cheaper and easier to use these technologies, we're going to consume more. But what it's going to mean is that these other skills become more important as the technologies get cheaper. And these other skills you're talking about, ideation, thinking, being creative, these are huge. If you or anyone else can go on ChatGPT and implement, you get Copilot to write code for you, then suddenly that's not a limiting factor anymore. The ideas are, and that's a huge change.
Yeah, I have a friend who told me about a situation, and now he says that meetings become workshops. Ideas, yeah, meetings become workshops. And one of the things that he said happened was that he was in a meeting and they were talking through an idea for a product. And one of the, people on the team was quietly working in the corner and then threw up on the screen where they had actually built the prototype with these no code tools in the meeting while it was happening.
That's pretty agile, right?
Like, that's amazing. Like, it used to be you'd have the meeting and then you go off and then you come back and it takes weeks, but it's like, and I think that, um, that sets up that sort of calls on a different set of skills and a comfort with adaptation, ideation, and, and these types of things. So I just wanna ask, have you seen in your research or in any of the adjacent research that you've done with BCG, um, anything specifically around adaptability and tolerance for uncertainty shaping organizational success? Like, can we put a finger on how this works?
I think that's fascinating, and I totally agree. Our last report we focused on uncertainty because we think that there is so much uncertainty right now within the business environment. I mean, I could point to 1,000 things, and this has become a laundry list of like things I'm worried about. But we deal with a lot of uncertainty. And what we found is that people who are using artificial intelligence were more likely to be able to handle uncertainty, to manage uncertainty. And that seems a little weird because you'd think of this changing and this tools as being a cause of uncertainty. And that's true. It is a cause of some uncertainty, but at the same time, it's a great way to manage it. We focused on, for example, uncertainty around technology, and we found that people are 1.8 times as likely to be able to manage uncertainty if they're using technology to learn. And I'll come back to this learning in a second because I think learning is the underlying mechanism. We talk about talent disruption. That's something that every organization is facing with an aging workforce and changing skills. The people who are better at learning with technology are 2.2 times as likely to be able to manage that uncertainty. And then, legal was the other one we looked at. There's a lot of legal complexities, and we found similar sorts of things here. We think the underlying mechanism is around learning, is around organizational learning, because this tool, it can help us do things better and faster. You can write your essay for you if you're a student, but at the same time, it can codify what an organization knows. It can synthesize patterns. It can help us get that information to the right person at the right time. These are the hallmarks of learning. So I'm very excited about the idea of organizational learning as the mechanism by which artificial intelligence can help mitigate some of these uncertainties you were talking about.
Wow, I'm just mind blown about what you said because, because I look at mental, emotional, and social health through my venture fund, one of the things that is sort of clear is the importance of agency for human health and happiness. Like people have to feel like when people feel helpless, when they feel like they have no control or that they can't do anything, it has a very big impact. And so, what I think I hear you saying is that people who, in very uncertain environments, people who are using the artificial intelligence tools, they are better able to deal with that uncertainty, and it makes me think that part of it is because they feel like they have agency with these tools, hyper agency maybe.
I love the term agency here. I think that's spot on. One of just a tiny thing that bothers me is how often we use artificial intelligence as the actor in a sentence. Artificial intelligence does X. And I hate that we're giving this tool that agency because it's not the way it works. We use tools to do things. So we are the actors here. And I know that's a little bit of a grammar trickery, but the fact that it's still us as human actors using this, it's a big deal, and that agency is important. One of the things we looked at was people's self-determinization. So how much do you have control? And one of the great examples I liked was out of Land of Lakes. So Teddy Bukele, he's a fascinating person there and he was telling us about how farmers are using artificial intelligence. And you might think, well, what does farming have to do with artificial intelligence? And I can assure you, it has a whole lot to do. And I had no idea until I talked to him. But also, it's not that it's taking away agency. So, for example, these models can help farmers understand how to plant, understand what to water, but they also have a giant history of understanding their specific land. And so, what they found is that these tools are helping them sort of question some of the things they may have done constantly and rotely. But at the same time, they're still the people who are choosing what to plant. And you might think it would be isolating. So, another part of people's agency is not feeling isolated. Well, okay, you've got a model, it's telling you to plant, you're deciding what to plant, you've got some choice, but you're isolated. Well, no, they're finding the farmers are less isolated because what they're doing is now they have all sorts of scientists that they can talk to within Land of Lakes to figure out what this means for their land. And so it's built up this network of communication at a very different level than what seed do I put in the ground and when do I harvest it. And I think that's a really fascinating example. And it really speaks to fundamentally human agency. And Conversely, I'm worried about the loss of agency. As the tech giants come out, and I don't want to get on a rant against tech giants, but I think we have to be very concerned about the pervasive use of these technologies and tools that are embedded in so much of our lives that we may not be aware of. So, I mean, we can go a little darker there if you want to.
Well, I mean, I think it raises a good point around thinking through how we like I one of the things I love about your research, and one of the reasons why I'm at SHRM too, out of all of the things that I could do, is because I think this place where the technology is actually touching people is the most important and the most interesting. So, human beings are mimics. It's how we learn how to speak, it's how we learn how to walk. And, one of the things that, I think we have to think about too is that the, as the interface turns to voice, as it becomes more immersive, because as they get better, we're going to use them more. We're going to use the tools more and more and more. Really actually paying attention to the human computer interface and how it affects us. And then also, how do we want it to affect us? Because, one of the things I love about what you just said before is that we don't have to be passive in how these things are developed. And so I think that's really important to remember. But I want to just touch on something with the Land O'Lakes. I'm one of the things I read in the research was about um, how organizations, and that's sort of like a looser organization, how it shifts culture. And you mentioned that these farmers are more connected than they've been before. What are some of the things that really excite you about where this could go? Like if like let's say we control for the risks, and where could it take us? What sort of organizations and cultural shifts could we have if we do this well?
There's so much potential within. So I'm gonna make fun of myself for a minute. I go into a classroom, I teach a class. There's 35, 40 students in there. Some of those students are lost. They're not prepared. They're not, I try to get that number low. Some of the students are bored because they already know it. And so what's happening is that we in the educational world are delivering a 14-week semester with a relatively homogeneous program. And that's been the lecture model of education for years. But the individual can learn so differently. And I think that we have so much potential as individuals to learn using these technologies that I'm super excited about. Why do we tell people in class things that they already know? If they already know it, we should move on. We need a better diagnostic for what people know. We need to know what they ought to know. So what's the next thing that would help them progress to get better? That's a diagnostic problem and it's a delivery problem. These are fundamentally have the potential to change how we learn as humans. And, I don't want to disrupt the entire educational system because I have a vested interest here. But the point is that we can change how we as humans learn and the kinds of things that we learn. And I think that's a very fascinating world. And I don't really know the right answers. It's difficult. Like, for example, I've tried very hard to start a fire with two sticks, rubbing them together. I'm incapable of doing that. Back in prehistoric times, that would have kind of, I would have been useless to society. But I think I'm doing okay now not knowing how to do that. So human skills that are necessary change. Maybe we can't drive a stick shift. We have automatic transmission. Maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't know how to navigate weather stars because we have GPS. The point is this technologies are changing the skills that we need as humans. And I'm excited about the potential for artificial intelligence to help us get better and to help us as humans learn. And that's, I think, what is possibly the fundamental most exciting thing. We can aggregate that to the organizational level, but at the individual level, it's amazing.
And I think on the organizational level, that's how organizations will succeed or fail, is the degree to which they can adapt, ideate, and learn, and be a growth culture. So in your 2024 report, you talked about organizations using AI to do new value creation versus just optimizing existing processes. Could you speak to that? How will that exploratory approach transform business?
Yes. Ooh, yeah, that's a big topic here. We I'm not against optimizing. Actually, I like optimizing a lot. We could do things better. A good example is healthcare. So healthcare is one of the few places where we still send faxes back and forth. So a company has information in the computer system, they print it, they send it by fax, they take it, and then they type it into another computer system. That's the medical process. Now, if you think about that, we could use artificial intelligence to automate that character recognition so someone isn't typing in those faxes into a new system. We can optimize that. Or we could just not send a fax. And so the point here is that by thinking about the process overall, we may eliminate steps entirely rather than optimize them. We may not need to optimize entering information into a new system. We may need to think of ways to transfer that. And it's a bit of a silly example, but the point is that sometimes, just using these technologies to optimize and improve things, we don't understand and step back and say, what are we trying to do and what would be a better overall process? And I think that's challenging.
Well, one of the things that the report talked about was the interplay between organizational culture, AI use, and effectiveness. So, what are the frameworks or strategies that would help us, think through, what we should just throw out, like sending faxes?
Yeah. So one of the dangers, and actually, this is a great example that Artie Zaghami at H&M mentioned at the time. Whenever you get instructions from IKEA, they say tighten all the screws a little bit, and then go back and tighten them some more, and tighten them some more. When you change the tire, you don't tighten one lug nut completely and then tighten the other because it'll be off balance. So we think about that at the organizational level. We don't need to hyper optimize one area and have it be super optimized and other areas not, because there are boundaries between all organizational areas. So a bit of artificial intelligence use everywhere, improving processes, and we're going to find out that those borders and those links between organizational processes may be the facts from my earlier example, and that we can eliminate those and streamline those connections. And in an ideal world, we have a less siloed organization because of that. But I think it's got to start with working in individual areas and improving versus sort of going whole hog in one. And I'll point to human resources because I know that's what your audience here. That's an area that's often lagged with technology, and I think it's a place we need to get a little more tightenings of the screws in that area to see what these technologies can help us with here, particularly around learning.
Yeah, and we agree. It's one of the reasons why SHRM brought in an executive in residence and why we're really looking to support our membership in understanding AI, raising the fluency level, bringing them successes, giving them the information on what can lead to failure, because we feel this way too. So I want to do a little compare and contrast. Your 2021 report showed that AI is reshaping success metrics and strategic assumptions. And now that we're in 2024, what's changed? In the most recent research, how did organizations approach these shifts? What are the success metrics and assumptions that you see most common now?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard. I mean, we are driven by metrics. Everything is measurements. These KPIs are very important, and so there's a lot of attention to those. But at the same time, we have to be careful what we measure, and I think the introduction of these tools has challenged some of the existing measures in ways that are really, I think, hard for us to grapple with. One of the one of the examples that I liked, and one of the quotes that I'll use here sorry. One of the quotes that I'll use here is from Gina Chung at DHL. And so one of the things that she said was, and I love this quote, the first day is the worst day for artificial intelligence. It's going to improve, it's going to get better. And so if we start off with measurement around the existing measures and we put some sort of systems in place, chances are they're not going to do well on day one. But the idea with machine learning is exactly that sort of learning. We wouldn't fire someone on the first day of the job if they didn't perform up to peak performance on day one. That's not how we would treat a coworker. Well, similarly, we're going to have to think about how we measure how these systems are performing and how are helping us perform with a longer term view. And that doesn't mean we have to give these systems, runway to fail for years before, reining them in. At the same time, I don't think we can look at day one with the existing metrics and say, all right, this isn't performing. Let's throw out the system.
Right. Wow. Absolutely. Because what you measure shapes your organization. And so understanding that on day one, we actually might not have the right measurement and understanding that and then looking at all of the wheels on the car. I really like that metaphor. And then something that you said earlier that I just want to go back to before I asked you the last question is I love what you said about, not describing artificial intelligence as an actor. And you mentioned, oh, it might be a little bit of a grammar thing, but, language is the human OS, and words really matter. Words shape products, they shape belief, they shape so many things. And so I think it actually really matters where the comma is, especially with this, as we're thinking about like what is what as humans do we aspire to? What are we doing here? What do we want? How do we want our organizations to evolve? So I just wanted to bring that back before I ask you the final question.
That's a great point because you're speaking to not being passive. We are not, you know, victims of this technology that we will, I hope at least that we can take some sort of control about the directions these technologies change us. And that's difficult given how much uncertainty there is about the technologies. They're changing constantly and regulations and laws and guidelines inherently lag. But that doesn't mean we should just throw up our hands and say, all right, whatever, let the technology run amok. We still have a lot of human agency, and I foresee that for quite some time.
Yeah, I spend much of my time with founders and tech founders, and founders are builders. And so, one of the things about this human and AI future is that we have to build what we want. Like if we want it, we have to build it. The magic pixies aren't going to do it. And so, when we look at things that are not quite right with it, when we look at things that are disturbing about it, we have to build the alternatives. And certainly there's a role for regulation and other things, but we also have to actually build the alternatives. We have to build what we want because the magic pixies don't do that.
One little follow up on that is that actually, and I shouldn't say this to your audience, but I love bias. I love it when these systems are biased because bias exists in culture. And the fact that we've automated bias may be the first step towards reducing that bias because then we can
Mm.
start to adjust some of those levers. But I just think that's a point for your audience because they're going to come out and face things that, oh, this system is biased in this way or that way. And largely it will be because of training data, but we can improve that.
Yeah, I've actually seen that done where, the thing about when a system is built and it's biased and you can recognize the bias, then you can weight against the bias and
Mhm.
you can have the system be unbiased with the weights on it. You cannot do that with a person. It's very hard.
Much harder to do with a group of people. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, final question. What has surprised you? So, you're looking at organizations and how they're using AI to rethink culture and collaboration. What is the thing that when you looked at it, you were like, oh, wow, didn't expect that?
I think we have a tendency to focus on the production of systems. Like come from an engineering background. We think about how to build systems. We think much less about the consumption, how those systems are used, how they will change the environments that they're put in. And that to me is a huge thing. Is how how these systems and how the choices we're making affect these organizations in ways that are really difficult to predict. And I'd love to tell you that, oh yeah, I saw that coming, and I did not at all. It's and when people put in systems, it changes things in ways that we are not ready for and don't expect. But we have to be adaptable, to your word, to adjust them in the future. And I think that's, maybe that mindset of having to go in and adapt in the future is something we all need to work on. I could be more adaptable. Ask anybody that has to deal with me.
Me too. Great. And so that's it for this week's episode. A big thank you to Sam for sharing your experiences and insights with us. Before we wrap up, everyone, I encourage you to follow the AI+HI Project wherever you enjoy your podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to comment, leave a review, and help spread the word. Finally, you can find all of our episodes on our website at shrm.org/AI+HI.
Hiring? Let Robert Half's specialized recruiters and award-winning AI find you skilled candidates in as little as 48 hours. Visit roberthalf.com/SHRM today. At Robert Half, we know talent.
SHRM.